many older Americans, Alzheimer's disease is a scary word, a dreaded condition that slowly rips away dignity. I'm scared of it, and I bet some of you are too. I've watched several family members gradually succumb to this awful disease. At its core, Alzheimer's disease robs someone of their memory, and then, over time, steals their ability to cook, feed, or even bathe themselves. It often leaves them and their family members embarrassed, worried, and confused. When I was in my 20s, my mother died after a short battle with cancer. Around this same time, my 27-year-old cousin also suddenly passed away. It was a dark time for me and for my family. My great-grandfather, who helped raise my mother, who loved her dearly, would frequently call the house asking to speak to my cousin and wondering why he had not seen him lately. After I'd tell my great-grandfather that he had passed, he would break down in tears, and this happened very frequently. He didn't remember my cousin's passing. He also rarely asked about my mother, and that left me, my family, wondering why. Did he love my cousin more than he loved my mother? His Alzheimer's disease confused all of us. I've also seen the devastating impact of Alzheimer's disease on a loving grandmother who dedicated 100% of her time and energy ensuring that those she loved were well taken care of. I have 3 small children, and when they were in elementary school, she would faithfully wait by the front door to greet them as they came home from school. Gradually, she started sitting at the front door earlier and earlier, until eventually she was sitting there at noon. Our attempts to convince her that it wasn't time yet were often met with an insistence that it's not safe for the children out there. And despite her affection toward my children, over time, she forgot their names, and they became little boy and little girl. Alzheimer's disease robbed her of the ability to do what she had done her whole life, which is take care of those that she loved. And there are countless other stories just like this. Odds are many of you know someone with Alzheimer's, or someone who is taking care of someone with Alzheimer's. And for decades, all of us struggled to provide support and care while the available medications failed to slow down the erosion going on in the brain. Well, I want to tell you that there is now finally a ray of hope for Alzheimer's disease. As of this year, we now have a disease-modifying treatment, but, and this is crucial, for it to be most effective, we need to use it correctly. So let's start with some basics about Alzheimer's disease. It is a large and rapidly growing public health problem, both here in the United States and all across the globe. Currently, around 7 million Americans are affected, and by 2050, this number is estimated to reach more than 13 million Americans. Globally, this number is expected to reach more than 150 million by 2050. And from an economic perspective, in the United States, the cost of treatment is staggering at about $300 billion a year. By 2050, that cost is estimated to reach $1 trillion. And this affects all of us, as much of these costs are covered by Medicare. Outside of the financial costs, Alzheimer's disease also greatly impacts tens of millions of family members and caregivers who work tirelessly to bring safety and, importantly, dignity to those who are suffering. The costs to individuals, their loved ones, and the economy are enormous, and they impact all of us. You know, despite commonly receiving a diagnosis in one's 60s, Alzheimer's disease is fundamentally a midlife disease. Its slow erosion of the brain usually begins in the 40s, even though it tends to be identified much later in life. Unknown to you and your medical team, this disease stealthily erodes brain cells for years or even decades before its detrimental effects come to light. And the optimal strategy for treating this progressive condition involves early intervention before irreversible brain damage occurs. However, early detection is challenging. The most widely accepted framework for understanding the biology and time course of Alzheimer's disease, known as the amyloid beta hypothesis, recently led to the development of the first disease-modifying treatment for Alzheimer's disease. And this is the ray of hope that I mentioned earlier. The pivotal component that was instrumental in this groundbreaking discovery was the observation that the slow erosion of the brain in Alzheimer's begins with the buildup of a protein called amyloid beta. So the goal was simple. We needed to create a drug that attacks these brain-clogging plaques. If you stop the plaques, you stop the rest of the process from occurring, including brain shrinkage. Just this summer, the FDA gave full approval for the first medication that reduces these harmful plaques. In a study published this year in the New England Journal of Medicine, 18 months of treatment resulted in a 70% reduction in these harmful plaques. It's amazing. Control participants in that study saw a 5% increase in those harmful plaques in that same time. And though this is not a silver bullet, there is now hope. Hope that eventually Alzheimer's disease will be both preventable and treatable. Hope that for the first time we can bend the course of this dreaded disease. As I'm sure many of you know, all of the previous medications that we had did not address these plaques. They were merely symptomatic treatments. At best, they were like putting a tiny bandage on a gaping wound. It's important to mention several caveats about this treatment approach. First, there's no doubt about it, these medications are not cheap, at about $26,000 a year. But we can compare that to the cost of assisted living with memory care, which runs about $70,000 a year. And the medicine addresses prevention and retained independence, whereas the latter, merely maintenance. Obviously, the cost of medicine needs to come down, and this should happen with time and with scale. In addition, this does not factor in the loss of income to family members who are unable to work while providing care, or for the cost of bringing in outside help to provide much-needed respite. Taking care of someone with Alzheimer's disease is hard. And finally, how do we put a price on quality of life and years being present as opposed to being lost? Second, because this medication attacks the primary protein implicated in Alzheimer's disease, it should not be used for other types of dementia, at least not until we know it is safe and effective to do so. This is particularly important because one potential side effect of this new class of medications is brain abnormalities that can be seen on MRI. Finally, and this is vital, these medications do not create new brain cells, and therefore functioning will not return to its previous level. A person will not suddenly have excellent memory again. If my great-grandfather were put on these medications now, today, he still probably would not have recalled that my cousin passed, unless we got him treatment earlier. This is precisely why early identification of this midlife disease is so critical. for optimal intervention, these medications need to be started before significant memory loss occurs. Unfortunately, distinguishing between Alzheimer's disease and normal aging very early in the course of the disease is challenging. But there's a second ray of hope. We already have the tools necessary to diagnose Alzheimer's disease much earlier than we currently do. However, to do so, we need to change the way we think about brain health. We must move from reactive to proactive brain health care. If you look at some of our biggest healthcare success stories, like the reduction in mortality from heart disease, we accomplish this through early detection and intervention. We accomplish this through improving our understanding of the risk factors, screening for them, and then intervening. We can do the same thing with Alzheimer's disease. Some of you might be wondering, what does this look like? This endeavor requires a change in how we think about brain well-being. Imagine engaging in routine brain checkups similar to the preventative care we provide to our cardiac health. At the heart of these assessments are comprehensive neuropsychological evaluations, which can be complemented with the strategic use of specific brain imaging techniques. This mental shift reshapes our approach to cognitive well-being and opens a door to a future where early intervention becomes the cornerstone of a life lived with mental sharpness. For many people, neuropsychology is an unknown field. Neuropsychological evaluations use tests to measure cognitive functions like attention or memory, and physicians routinely refer patients for neuropsychological evaluations, but only after significant symptoms have been identified. It's now time to start routine testing for our brain. Research over the past 20 years demonstrates that neuropsychological evaluations can detect signs of Alzheimer's disease 5 or even 10 years before we diagnose it now, yet we still don't regularly evaluate brain functioning. And to be fair, at the moment, this approach is also costly. However, technological developments should drive costs down. But what would you rather have? A wife, a grandfather, a sibling who's unable to bathe or feed themselves, whose dignity is ripped away, who requires 24 supervision for years? I think most of us would prefer to maintain our dignity longer, and I certainly know what I would choose. So let's rewrite the narrative of Alzheimer's disease. Let's change it to a story of early intervention, of hope, and a world where our brains are as cherished and cared for as our hearts. What would you give for a couple more years of memories with those you love? Thank you.